Hello everyone. Following the honorable struggle of the samurai, we now face one of the greatest paranoias of the Middle Ages. If you had been born a woman in 15th century Europe, during a time when even possessing basic knowledge about treating an illness could get you burned at the stake, what would your life have been like? Life began with second-class citizenship and the complete absence of legal rights. Being born a woman meant being subject to the authority of a man, father, husband, or priest. I could not own property in my own name, sign a legal contract, and my testimony in court was rarely taken seriously. My existence was primarily limited to domestic chores, childbearing, and serving my man. At the bottom of the social structure, even male serfs had some legal protections that came with being male, while I, as a woman, was utterly defenseless against any accusation or slander. For me during this period, the concepts of freedom or independence were merely dangerous fantasies. Village life revolved around farming and craftsmanship, but everything was overshadowed by superstition and the church. Life in the village, while requiring community solidarity, was also filled with a constant atmosphere of distrust and surveillance. A bad harvest, a sick animal, or a dead baby was never an accident. It was always the result of someone's malice or witchcraft. The slightest abnormal behavior would lead to whispers. For me, the important thing was not just to follow the rules, but also to appear very pious and ordinary in the eyes of my neighbors. As being different was the greatest danger. Marriage for me was a legal necessity and the only rational path to survival. Being a single or widowed woman was the first step towards attracting suspicion and becoming an easy target. Marriage provided me with some protection by hiding me behind my husband's name. However, in return for this protection, I had to obey absolutely and not defy my husband. My husband's violence or arbitrary decisions could not be legally questioned. For me, marriage was less about love or happiness and more about a chain that solidified my position in society. Even my husband's anger was less frightening than the wrath of a witch hunter outside. Traditionally, women were the community's healers and midwives. Knowledge of medicinal herbs, natural remedies, and childbirth represented a vital wisdom passed down through generations. However, during the witch hunt era, this knowledge turned into a deadly danger for me. An herbal mixture that cured my neighbor's illness could suddenly be viewed as evidence of a pact with the devil. Too much knowledge, too much intelligence, or a natural ability to heal were considered characteristics of a witch. Therefore, I had to hide my knowledge and skill, as even the act of helping people could easily lead me to the fire. The easiest targets were the women ostracized by society. In the eyes of witch hunters, every woman who was old, widowed, lived alone, owned property independently, or did not conform to societal norms was a potential witch. Even extreme poverty or excessive beauty could attract suspicion. Being widowed left me without my husband's protection, making me most vulnerable. If I possessed a rich inheritance, my neighbor's jealousy would increase, raising the likelihood of slander against me. For me, survival meant not drawing attention, not standing out, and always remaining average and in the shadows. The doctrine of the church was the greatest pressure on me. Scriptures and sermons portrayed women as weak beings, easily susceptible to sin. Theologically, I was the heir to Eve's sin, and it was easier for the devil to possess my soul than a man's. This belief turned the witch hunt into a theological imperative. Every sermon from the church deepened the fear in my heart. For me, piety was not just faith in God, but also proof that others would not see me as a witch. Every Sunday Mass was a performance I gave to save my life. There was a book that compiled all the horrors of the witch hunt, Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This book was a fusion of lore and paranoia, describing how to identify, interrogate, and punish witches. The book presented the existence of witches as a scientific fact. Local judges, lawyers, and church officials accepted this guide as indisputable law. My life was dependent on a book written in libraries that viewed me as a non-human entity. This book gave authorities the power to interpret even my most ordinary actions as proof of a pact with the devil. The accusation usually started with a simple event, a neighbor's chicken dying, jealousy, or an argument. That's when a single word whispered by someone, which could shatter my entire life. Slander was the most powerful weapon of the era. Someone might have dreamed of seeing me with the devil, or taken a small bribe to convey suspicion to the judge. This entire process did not require evidence. Mere suspicion and malice were enough. For me, smiling at my neighbors and getting along with them was more dangerous and important than a lion hunt. If an accusation was made, a terrifying trial process would begin. I would be captured, bound, and immediately thrown into a dungeon. The interrogation was not about proving my innocence. It was about forcing me to confess to being guilty. From the beginning to the end of the interrogation, torture was an inseparable part of the process. People confessed to their crimes not to prove their innocence, but because they could not endure the torture. In this process, my only legal right was to surrender myself to the hands of God, because earthly law had already abandoned me. Torture was the heart of the witch hunt, and was justified by judges as a means to uncover the truth. Pulling nails, stretching limbs, or branding with fire. These practices aimed to break not only the body, but also the mind. Judges believed that a confession was valid evidence. What mattered to me was how long I could endure this pain, and at what point I would accept a non-existent crime just for the pain to end. Knowing that a confession given under torture would still hasten the trial and guarantee execution was a terrifying dilemma. Another proof of my guilt was the search for the witch's mark on my body. This could be a mole, birthmark, scar, or even an extra nipple, indicating the spot where the devil had touched me and made a pact. My entire body would be meticulously examined by the interrogators. Any mark found had to be pricked with needles to test if it was insensitive to pain. If the needle did not hurt, it was definitive proof. For me, this search was not only humiliating, but also the complete loss of control over my own body, because a natural mark on my skin could seal my fate. One of the most arbitrary tests of the law was the ordeal by water. I would be bound and thrown into a consecrated river or pond. The belief was simple. Water accepted innocence, so if I sank, I was innocent but could drown. If the water rejected me and I floated, I was guilty because I floated with the devil's help. This test essentially created a lose-lose situation, as there was no chance of surviving without sinking. For me, this was the moment when human reason was surpassed, and my fate was entirely surrendered to superstition. In court, a woman's right to speak in her own defense was limited, and a man's accusation carried more weight than my words. I would face male witnesses who had higher social status and were familiar with the law. When a male neighbor spread slander about me, his word would be considered more valid than my defense. The only thing I could do in this unjust environment was desperately beg for mercy. The justice system did not expect me to prove my innocence. It expected me to confess, because my gender already made me a potential criminal. Midwifery was a traditional and sacred duty for women, helping a new life come into the world. However, during the witch hunt era, this most sacred duty was reversed. Midwives became the biggest targets, who could be accused of using evil magic if a baby died during birth. My hands that brought new life could suddenly be seen as the hands of the devil's servant. This situation led to even newborns being viewed with suspicion in society. Midwifery knowledge ceased to be a survival practice and became a risk of being burned at the stake. The belief that witches had sexual intercourse with the devil and made a pact with him formed the basis of the witch hunt. Interrogations focused on learning the details of my encounters with the devil. This accusation reinforced the theological view that women were sexually weak and easily tempted. Under torture, I would be forced to confess to the unreal details of my meetings or flights with the devil. For me, these claims were a fantastic accusation that went beyond the bounds of reason, making it impossible to prove my innocence. One of the darkest and most earthly reasons for the witch hunt was material gain. The property and lands of witches found guilty were immediately confiscated. These assets were usually divided among the accusers, the judges, and the local officials who carried out the execution. This situation fueled the greed that drove the witch hunt, because accusing a wealthy or property-owning woman was a direct source of income for the authorities. For me, even owning property was a potential death warrant, as it drew the attention of my neighbors or local officials. If a woman was accused of being a witch, the situation of her children would also remain under uncertainty and social pressure. Children were either viewed as potential witches like their mothers, or became outcasts, carrying the stigma of their mother's sin. No one would want to play with the witch's children or give them work. This showed that the witch hunt targeted not only the individual, but also an entire family and future generation. If my mother had been accused, my future and place in society would have been completely destroyed as well. Disasters were the biggest fuel for social paranoia. Bad weather, crop failure, epidemics spreading through the town. All these inexplicable events were always explained by a witch's malice and magic. Witches were accused of causing storms, poisoning animals, and tempting men. This belief spread hysteria among the masses and turned every neighbor into a potential accuser. What was frightening for me was the complete loss of logic and the linking of every natural event to a personal crime. If the court found me guilty, my final journey would be to the village square, where the public execution would take place. I would usually be executed by burning, even at the moment of execution. The priest and the crowd would expect a final confession from me, and for me to renounce my pact with the devil. Death was terrifying, but it was also a hope for salvation, where the pain and fear would end, and I would find eternal peace. The execution scene was used to teach the crowd a lesson and reinforce the fear in society. For me, even my final moment would be a public spectacle. Even when the witch hunts ended, permanent traces of fear and distrust remained in society. Neighbors could no longer forget the old suspicions. Women continued to hide their natural talents and knowledge. The witch hunt era, while costing the lives of thousands of innocent women, also solidified the power of the church and male authority. Even survivors like me would live a shadowy existence, constantly fearing that the finger of accusation could point at us again at any moment. Society would carry the scars of this mass hysteria for generations. So that was my life during the witch hunt era, filled with fear, paranoia, and horror. After the honor of the samurai, we learned that silence was the most valuable thing here. After this journey, I realized what a great blessing the presumption of innocence and equality before the law are in modern times. Which cruel era should we visit in our next video? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this alternative history journey, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you on the next adventure. Take care.